What is up, guys? Lord Nick here, bringing you another One Piece related video. In this video, guys, we're going to be going over what I learned about Rebecca for OP07. So, to start us off, guys, we have a slideshow. And we're going to start it off with what tier do I think Rebecca falls into? So, what do I mean by this? And what I mean is, like, is she in the S tier? Is she in the A tier? The B tier? What do these tiers kind of represent? So S tier is kind of the meta definers. A tier is going to be your like tournament winners. These are guys that can win a tournament, even though they're not the main guys driving the meta. These are kind of the guys that can win a tournament. And then I think B tier is kind of your rogue decks. These are decks that can pop off in a tournament. They may not win it, but they can get kind of top 8. But they're not consistently going to be there. And then anything below that, I think, is just kind of casual play to just terrible. So where does Rebecca fall in? Well, I think she actually falls into the lowest of those categories. They're the B tier of the defined ones there, because technically there's below it. But B tier, I think, is where she falls. And the reason I think she's in this tier 2, B tier, whatever you want to call it, is because the leader is gated by the fact that she can't attack. She has a lot less tempo than everybody else. And with so many powerful on plays, with so many powerful, just amazingly strong events right now that can move 1 or 2 characters and just enables you to just chip 5 at your opponent with your leader. Not being able to even just chip 5 with your leader is a massive, massive disadvantage. So because of this one massive disadvantage that Rebecca has, she is in the B tier, but it's mainly just due to the fact that because of how the meta has shaped up, she is in the B tier. If the meta sped up a little bit, she's gone again. She's just not a good deck at that point. The drawback of having your leader not be able to attack makes her really, really rough. I have tried other lists that I haven't made videos for with her, like Navy list, do the Sakazuki stuff, and it just comes down to your leader not attacking makes you lose the game. Like it's a very frustrating aspect that I think that she has a really cool card pool. She has a really cool design. The aesthetic of the deck itself is a ton of fun, but for now she can't move up just because of just how balanced the game is around your leader attacking. And not being able to do that just makes you more of a for fun deck, which is why her, Iceberg, and BV I think will just kind of be mid-tier meme decks along the way. So let's get into our matchups, though. What about her enables her to be in the B tier? So we're going to talk about the 5 main matchups that I see in my meta. Now, Law is, of course, a top matchup. Gecko still in the meta very fluently. Black Yellow Luffy still in the meta very heavily. I haven't put them here, but if I were to put them here, Black Yellow Luffy is somewhere between good and great. Gecko is somewhere between bad and horrible. And then Law is probably in the okay category, actually. Somewhere between good and okay, actually. I think we actually have a little bit of a leaning advantage on the current Law. Now, when we get to OP08, that can change things a lot. But let me kind of give you a quick breakdown as to why each of these leaders represent each of these tiers. So why is Enel in the great tier? A lot of folks on these videos tell me, oh man, I'm terrible in that matchup. How do you win this matchup? How is it good? I don't understand. I have played the fatigue matchup into Enel so many times that I just know Enel's strategy and I know how he has to play around stuff. So if I don't chip his life down, he's forced to play Flampes, which is a 2K counter. Now, if you're running the fatigue strat, you're probably running geckos. You probably have a pudding or 2 in your deck. I most of the time drop it from my list, but you can add it back to your list. And if you have the pudding, it's a great way of punishing the Enel. But because of this, because he wants to go long, if you are also playing a I want to go long list, it comes down to who has the better go long. And guess what? Rebecca can do really, really well in the long con, because at best case scenario, he can remove 1 character a turn with his Kingdom Comes, right? But then he's not developing a good body, right? 4-drop bodies would be if he's running Kikanojos or Frankies, and he wants Frankie off of life. And he's a 2K in hand, so he's probably not developing him. So he's just going to swing like 9 with a leader, and I could either counter out of it, which isn't great, or I could just block, and my blockers come back in my decks. So that's not that great of a tax either. So because of that, if he's just Kingdom Coming in the late game to get rid of the Kuzans, yeah, that gives him a better advantage then, but he's losing tempo advantage, and at that point, I probably have like a Kyros or Lumbus and a Hajruden on board as well. Right? Like if those are on board, or let's say it's just Kyros Hajruden, right? And he's at 1 life and he's just using the freaking Kingdom Come to survive. he's not in a good spot, and there's not really a good way out of it, even if he does start dropping 10 drops again to heal up a bit. Like, he's just in a negative spot. You also want to let yourself fall to 3 life early. That sounds very counterintuitive because you don't want to go too low, but at 3 life, he doesn't really have a lot of good targets to KO stuff with Gadatsu, so his Gadatsu plays feel terrible. He might play him as a tempo play just to have a character, but we can easily just remove him. And if Kadatsu is not affecting our board state, it's just a vanilla 5 drop 6K, which is just really bad rate. So his cards become really bad into us because we just play around what he wants to do, which is starve us, and we're okay with that. So then we go into Bonnie. Bonnie is only in good because the fact that she can rest our leader. That, like, if she could only rest characters, I think we could actually just demolish Bonnie 100% of the time, but because she can rest our leader, it can turn off our Hajruden, it can mess up keeping our Kiroses alive, it can screw up a little bit of our combos of what we can do in this deck. And so because of that, it actually is just a little annoying, and the fact that she can rest our characters when we're swinging can be a bit annoying and make it hard to close out a game against her, despite the fact that we have a pretty good matchup into it, and we can clear her board pretty consistently and regularly. Hawkins is another card that is kind of annoying for us to deal with. He is a 7k blocker, which is a big enough blocker that is annoying. And even though he's only a 6-cost body, KOing him, he can just rest one of our characters and we're in a bad spot. So, you know, KOing him is difficult, and then swinging into him is actually kind of difficult too. But other than that, it's a pretty solid matchup. It kind of builds into a fortress build, and we, again, just like in an L, we kind of want to go late anyways, so that's fine by us. So Nami is in the okay strat because if you play it wrong, you can lose this 100% of the time. For a long time, I was just losing into Nami, and I couldn't figure out why. And a big part of it is because I was just trying to do the 7k swings early. Like everybody was saying, you just develop a character, do 7k swings, and then you're taxing her cards out of her hand, right? Well, the problem with that is that your leader doesn't attack, so you're not putting tempo there. So playing that way kind of loses you the game. So the way you got to do it is you just turtle up, let them get a big-ass hand, and, you know, if they keep 9-10 Dawn up, the only thing you do is like okay, let's say I have a Luffy on board. I'll give Luffy 5 Dawn, swing 12. Okay, do they get counter out of that? Cool, they countered out of it. Now they're down to like 4 cards in hand, and they maybe have 1 Dawn available. So you can stick your other 4 on like a Kyros and test it again. And guess what? You're actually probably pretty good at that point. They might counter out of that, and then they're down to like 1 card in hand. And they've not been milling out of their deck as much. But there are some builds that run a lot more of the characters, and the characters enable her to just keep milling out on her turn, and I think that is a problematic matchup for us. At that type of build can be difficult. So I put her in the okay because, yeah, against the standard Nami build, we can probably beat it. Against that kind of build, it probably doesn't. In a lot of the decks that are in the okay, it kind of comes down to build orientation. That's really where they are, and they're pretty 50-50 because of that. Bad matchups generally mean that they're leaning slightly to our opponent's matchup. You know, Lucci embodies the bad matchup for us. You know, he is about 60% win rate against. I have about a 40% win rate against Lucci, so I lose 60% of the time. So at that 60% loss rate, it just means that I'm just not winning in it enough. And the reason it's there is just because he wants to go mid-game-ish, and we can handle the mid-game. That's not a big problem. The problem is once we try to get into the late game ourselves, he can just kind of KO our characters on repeat, and it becomes problematic to try to match tempo with him. And if we try to play a big character in the late game, it's an easy thing for him to KO. And that can be problematic for us. So our matchup is somewhat iffish. I think the tempo build of Luffy, or with Luffy, is better for Rebecca into him. And then our horrible matchup is Perona. And Perona is a horrible matchup across no matter what build of Rebecca I've tried. Just because she can rest our Rebecca blockers, and we rely on that to kind of stay alive in the mid game. And if we're not taxing, and it doesn't really tax her any cards to do it, she could just develop her 4-drop 6k that KOs it. And she's not really down a card. She's developed a big body. She freely got her blocker out of the way and gets to swing with leader. So, you know, our on-curve kind of protect us and is set up kind of card is just completely negated. And a lot of decks can deal with 4-drops pretty consistently, but Perona does it for free, and that's just a problem. On top of that, we are very much, you know, same issue with why Lucci is kind of a bad matchup. Is we build characters to have pressure, and the fact that she can just easily remove them makes it pretty bad. Other decks that are not on here that you might be wondering about, Dofi falls into the okay category. He is much more aggro than Boa, and because of that, we can actually kind of handle him okay if he's not playing it perfectly. Now, if he's just, blindly rolling his Leer ability and doesn't miss a single one, then it kind of feels like yellow with all their triggers. It can go really badly for us, and it's kind of an RNG thing. If he's taking time to set up and he's only kind of chipping at us a little bit here in the early game, and he's not able to initially remove our characters before developing his, then we just get to start rolling over his board state and taking over into the late game. Now, as for Boa herself, she kind of falls closer to the Perona. She does similar type of control stuff. She maintains a hand size, and she's just using leveraging events that can just get rid of our top end and events that can get rid of our mid game. And so it just prevents us from actually being able to do anything if she's built more of the control build like she should be. So because of that, it actually becomes a very rough matchup for us. Blue in general is a bad matchup for Rebecca because bottom decking gets rid of our Kiroses, whereas almost no other deck can actually deal with Kiros efficiently. So if that's the case, which build is better then? Like, if I'm saying that these are kind of why these are in these categories, which build is better at leveraging these? Well, the Fatigue build with the Kuzans, the Aramakis, the Geckos, that actually does really well into an L, really well into Bonnie, and pretty damn good into Nami. Pretty much anything OK and up is more than 50% win rate for the Fatigue deck. That being said, everything that is bad or lower is at best a 40% win rate for that deck, and most of the time it's about a 30 to 20% win rate for that deck. So that generally means that anything that is bad and horrible is really bad and horrible for our Fatigue deck. Anything that is okay or better is actually pretty dang good, so that's generally why I lean it. That being said, whoops, wrong way. The Tempo deck, well, the NL is not as good. It's not as good into the NL. It can one-shot the NL, which does give us some pretty big tempo there, but the NL Fatigue build can actually answer the Luffy pretty consistently. It can answer the Geckos pretty consistently. And we're not putting enough pressure and tempo in the mid game to actually be able to tax their hand in any way. So he kind of goes down to a good matchup. We can win it. It's just not as good. And then the Bonnie is roughly the same. It doesn't really change too much there. Same thing with the Nami. Actually, it might get better in the Nami. But the bad list against Lucci actually becomes a little bit better for us, because even if he does remove our Luffy, right, he KOs the Luffy. We have also just probably cleared 2 characters off of his board, which reduces his ability to play tempo nearly as well. His main boss monster is an 8-drop 9k. Luffy is actually pretty sufficiently statted to deal with that when we've been taxing his board state and making him constantly have to replay stuff. And if he's having to consistently remove our characters, he's keeping a lot of hands with almost no counter, which means we can actually just swing in and take out his characters more consistently. Same thing kind of goes for Perona. So because of this, those kind of get bumped up a little. So you can see something going on here a little bit weird. In the Luffy matchup, our great and good matchups kind of go down a little bit. But with the tempo build, our good matchups kind of fall down a bit, but our bad matchups come a bit. So everything's a little closer to center. It's all closer to about a 50-50 across the board with the tempo. It's not necessarily, it's somewhere between a 40-60 to a 60-40. All the decks kind of fall in that range. Whereas with the control, the Fatigue control, they run the gambit. We have decks that are almost an instant win. I've lost 2 times to an L with my Fatigue deck in the last 2 weeks out of close to 26 games. One of them was last night, and it had some weird techs in it. I'll give my opponent props for playing it relatively well, but also my draws turned out terrible because when we looked after the game, I was like, did I shuffle well enough? And the answer was right there in the bottom of my deck. My bottom 7 cards were as in order from bottom up. Aramaki, Brook, Lucci, Kiros. So no, I did not shuffle well enough. But outside of that, I haven't lost almost any game into an L as the Fatigue build Rebecca. Whereas with the Luffy, it's been very 50-50 in the past. The Luffy kind of tempo build been 50-50 in the past. So there are certain cards that generally make these matchups better, but whereas I've never beaten a Perona with my Fatigue build either. So whereas with the Luffy tempo build, I have beaten a Perona every now and then. So the matchups get closer together with the Luffy. We don't get any great matchups, but we don't really have any horrible matchups either. Whereas with the Fatigue, it runs the gambit. So they both have their strengths and weaknesses. Do you think that your meta is stronger where the Fatigue will do better? If there's a lot of Anels running rampant, I say Fatigue's better. If there's a lot of Peronas and Luccis, then hey, Tempo has a better chance of beating those decks. So that's the one you should play. But what if we take a look at the best cards in each of those decks. So what are the best cards in those decks? What are the cards that make those decks stand out and be good? Now, maybe not unique from each other to a degree, but just in general. Well, 2 of those cards are actually generic black cards that are in almost every black deck right now. Sabo and Rebecca are kind of those standout cards. So if that's the case, both of these variants of the decks run that. And the package that goes with those for Rebecca is the same. It's predominantly Dressrosa cards with 2 Brooks. So what's the difference? Well, the difference is who's your boss monster, Luffy or Kuzan? Well, both of them run Gecko as a secondary boss monster. What happens if I take out 3 copies of Gecko, which is all of them, and replace it with 3 copies of Luffy into our fatigue build? What would that look like? Well, if we do a few more tweaks to it, we get this build, which is my hybrid build, which I will be posting in the comments down below, or probably the description. I've had a guy asking for it, so it's going to be there. So we have mostly our fatigue list with splash of about 6 cards from our tempo list. And it combines the 2 of them together, and it kind of adds in the benefits of both with a little bit of negatives in and of it. Now, what are the decks that we are still really bad into? Boa is going to be that deck. Boa, there's just not much I can do to make us that much better into Boa. I think out of the 9 or 10 times I've played into Boa, I've beaten it twice. So it's not a good win rate into that deck. Same thing kind of goes with Perona. Those decks are just not going to get better. It's just not suited for Rebecca. You need leader tempo to be putting pressure on them so they run out of cards. And we just don't have that. If it's just board state, if they hit the removal cards, well, we lose. So it comes down to more of how often do they draw the cards versus how often, do we do well. So what else can we, so if that's the case, if that's how we have this, what wins us the game? What does the benefit of having this? Well, the things that we were good against, we stay good against. The things that we were great against, we stay great against because we still have the fatigue builds. But the things that we were okay against and bad into actually both get better. So we still maintain a couple of horrible matchups. We're pretty much instant losing into Perona and Boa. But everything else becomes okay or better. I think that's good enough. So let's jump into a game with this build. All right, guys, let's just jump into it. We have, let me just see if we can find a lobby real quick. Hey, oh man. This is also technically another auto loss matchup, but you're not going to, we're seeing more of them recently, but in general, you're not going to run into this matchup very often. Man, I never get lucky with this matchup either. I never find Kyros in this matchup early, and it's just real bad for us at this point. We have a Gravity Blade at least, so that is that. Hey, speak of the devil, he shall appear. We found a Kyros. So Kyros actually helps this matchup a decent amount. Because we can put out a Becca here, get a Kyros back, pop. Oh god, pudding. No, not like this. No. We're gonna counter out of that one. We don't want to take a lot of early chip damage. Ooh. Alright. Deploy. Grab. Deploy. No targets. Pass. Alright, we're drawing nothing but 2Ks, which is good and bad in and of itself. So I expect there to be a Ichiji coming out this turn. No stage for either of us is actually pretty good for us. Our stage is very useful against this deck. Their stage just allows them to have insane consistency. So if neither of us have it, I can survive without my stage. Their deck kind of can't. So we're going to be in a decent spot this next turn. If he doesn't Ichiji this turn. Okay, so he's Nijiing our Kyros? We're going to Niji our Kyros. Are you going to Niji the Rebecca? How are you doing this? Who are you returning to my hand? Returning the Rebecca seems like a bad idea. Returning the Kyros doesn't seem like a great idea either, but he's at least a body that can be a threat to him. Right? So I could see him returning the Kyros over the Rebecca. He returned the Rebecca because he wants to try to get chip damage in. All right. That seems real bad, bud. Oh, leader. I was like, wait, how is he drawing a card? Leader. Got it. He's at 5 cards. I mean, the pudding makes sense for this deck. He should almost never swing with this card. If he swings with this card, he's just asking for it to get removed. I'm very surprised that he actually let me keep the Kyros, because that gives me a card that can actually deal with his board state to a degree. Not popping off with babies every single turn is also really good. Wait, what? Sir. Sure. No trigger. I mean, I'm set up for him to pudding us this coming up turn, but like... Alright, thank you for wasting a swing. That's cool. You have a 1. Is there a 1-drop event he could be running? Ooh. We can guarantee the pudding kill. So let's do this. Let's swing 5 here. He probably counters. I did that backwards. Shit. I did that backwards. Fuck. I did the math and then I did it backwards. Well, that's going to cost us. That's going to cost us a lot. Probably should have still played the one-legged soldier, but at least this next turn we just do this. It's probably what we're doing, is we're just going to bottom deck 2 characters. He's at 7, I'm at 8, or I'm at 6, so he's above me right now. Eh. Meh. What else are you playing? Now you can't Ichiji, which I'm okay with. At best, he can Reiju here. Means he'd have to have a Reiju in hand and in trap, and both of them in hand. No block. Use. Let's bottom deck you. Cool. We like that. So you need a Reiju baby in hand and a normal Reiju in hand, because he hasn't had his stage. So no stage is kind of nutty here for us. We now have a controlling board state. We're about to put this card down. Do we put this guy down? Yeah, because that sets us up for a Kuz on the following turn. So we're just going to swing 5 and 5 into the pudding here. There's a baby Reiju. We're going to bottom that. 5. Wow. We got super lucky. Now, mind you, I misplayed, but also, like, this is just the worst I've seen a Reiju do. What the hell? He's also running some real jank cards in this Reiju list. And we're now a fatigue deck that's in a position to win fatigue, despite some interesting draws here. but also just because this guy doesn't have his stage. Like, that's crazy to me that he hasn't had his stage. I've never played into a Reiju where they don't have it, because they run it as a 4-of, because the card is just that, it's just that important to the deck. Maybe there's some Reiju lists now that aren't running it, but I think this is going to be the third time I've beaten a Reiju. It's usually an auto loss. They put out so much tempo early, they can kind of control my board and pressure my life so heavily that I don't really, without stage, I don't generally have a way of combating their board state. No sir, we do not allow that here. All right, Porsche. This is a pretty good card for the list because it allows you to potentially find your like choppers, but then you can employ a baby for free. It also puts a card down, which allows you to draw from leader ability. Got a Porsche off a Porsche, gets to draw off of leader. Play a chopper. Nice. Oh, he's at 9 Dawn and I'm at 8. Ha. Your chopper does nothing. Alright, that gets you baby back. Who are you getting back? Your Niji? What are you discarding? The Porsche? Bro, you're down to like no cards in this deck. It's kind of crazy to me. I mean, I'm down to no cards as well. I have one more life than him now. He's at full 10. Like, he'll be fine from here going forward. His Don will be at a good state. Sorry, I got a little quiet while I was doing that turn. I think that was a pretty telegraphed play, right? We were just going to Kuz on, kill something, bottom deck the other with our Aramaki. He gets a handful of cards. We know one in his hand is a Porsche. We know he didn't use his Sora. I don't know why he played the Sora then, but he didn't use it. I mean, we've gotten to a point though where he doesn't really have the tempo to deal with us. Even if he does find his Ichiji now, like, yeah, you can make the Aramaki smaller. He puts him to 6, right? Oh, he found an Ichiji. Okay, you put him to 6. You could swing 7 at my face. I'll take it because I don't really care. Your chopper doesn't get to live this next turn. At worst case scenario, I bottom the chopper with this. And I mean, yeah, you get one of your attacks through, bud. I'm sorry. I'm sorry that I'm ruining your game plan here. Not so sorry, but you know, you gotta pretend. So he needs another chopper to have a chance, and he needs me to not draw anything of use. There's a second chopper. All right, pick no cards to draw, but gets to deploy another chopper, gets to draw with his leader. I should have taken the hit just so we had another card. Oof, wish we could hit that Aramaki. All right, so I think we just smash you, bottom you. Need to leave 5 open. 7 at lead. We just do 2 7 at leads, then a 10 at lead. So the choice here is, do we swing with the Aramaki and put him to nothing? I think that is the option, because I don't think he can get enough attacks to actually kill us when we drop a Sabo. Because he has no real way of dealing with a 5 that can't be KO'd, right? Unless he's running Black Bug, I guess, maybe. But we're at 3 life. He only has 3 characters. Say he gets Baby Ichiji, Baby Ichiji. He'd also need 2 grown-up Ichijis in his hand. I don't think he can do it. His Niji is also gone. So like he's kind of getting cooked right now. Sorry, I was being very quiet there towards the end of this match. I'm a little happy. This is the first time we win this matchup. I didn't mention this being as like I know I kind of alluded to it at the beginning where I said, "Oh man, this is another insta loss." Usually we just get hounded by this deck. They just go so fast and so aggressive that we can't do it. They've seen that they're starting to try to build a wider board using the Porsche build. And I think because it doesn't necessarily like it does really good because you can drop all the babies with it with the Porsche, which is really strong. I think it's just not as good because I've also noticed that some of those lists just drop the judge. Not sure. No, sir. Yeah, that's game. My opponent's taking a little while, but I mean, he's trying to see if he can survive somehow. Yeah, we've already gotten rid of 2 choppers. Ooh, judge. That gets you back in Niji. I don't know what good that does for you. Okay, okay. You discarded. Okay, you discarded 3 babies. All right, so I'm assuming that means he has a Reiju, and he's just gonna try to Reiju to find him a card. Oh, he had the Ichiji. Okay. I mean, you're not getting rid of my characters at all here. You don't have any blockers because you didn't have. I can't think of his name. The green-haired one. He doesn't have the green one. He's got red. He's got blue. He got pink, but he ain't got green. Like. There's a chopper. All right. Well, he didn't have his stage, so he loses. That's just kind of how that happens with Reiju. But I mean, we got to see some of the build. We didn't get to see a lot of the Cavendish or the Luffy there, just because Coliseum didn't show up. So we had to play it more of a fatigue, and against this deck, we kind of needed to play it as fatigue. I'll be making sure to post more videos with that list, guys. But until the next video, I hope you all have a wonderful, wonderful day. Bye, guys.